The first time I saw one stand up, I was angry, not afraid, not awed, certainly not confused in any meaningful way. Angry. I mean, how dare they? This is supposed to be a tidy, nice community. That's why I am so active in the HOA. It was 2:13 in the morning, and the security lights over my garage had snapped on for the fourth time that week. White light poured across the driveway, over the clipped boxwoods, across the cul-de-sac, and into my bedroom through the narrow gap between the curtains. I had not been sleeping well. I had not been sleeping well for years, if I am honest, but there are different grades of insomnia. There is the kind where you read until your eyes ache. There is the kind where you watch television at a volume so low you have to imagine half the dialogue, and there is the kind where every small sound in the house seems to have been arranged specifically to get your attention. That night, it was the lights. I pushed back the covers, put on my slippers, and went to the window expecting to see deer in my hydrangeas again. They had been eating everything in my perfectly manicured garden. That was how this began. If you can believe something like this can begin with landscaping. I pulled the curtain aside. There were 7 deer standing in the middle of Carriage Lane. But they weren't crossing the road or grazing at the edge of anyone's lawn or lowering their heads to nose through the ivy around the mailbox posts. They were standing still. And all 7 faced my house. The street was empty except for them. The Becker's porch flag hung motionless. The small solar lights along the Patel's walkway glowed weakly blue. At the far end of the cul-de-sac, where the pavement curved toward the drainage woods, the darkness looked pressed flat between the trees. I remember noticing practical things first. No cars, no wind, no hooves scraping, no ears flicking at insects. The deer nearest the storm drain stood beneath the street lamp, half in white light, half in shadow. It was larger than the others, though at first I thought it was only the angle. Then it shifted its weight. Its front legs lifted slowly, not like an animal rearing back, not like something startled. There was no panic in it, no awkward thrashing, no brief mistake of balance. It rose as if standing had always been available to it, and it had simply decided to use the option. Its front legs hung down. Its narrow head stayed fixed toward my window. Behind it, beyond the last ring of streetlight, something much taller moved between the trees with the careful, thoughtful posture of a thing trying to remember the shape it was supposed to wear. 3 weeks before that, I had sent an email to the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association regarding deer waste on the east walking path. It was a reasonable email. I know what people say about me. I know they think I don't know, but of course I know. People who believe they are subtle rarely are. The slight delay before they wave. The conversations that stop when I arrive at the mailbox cluster. The way everyone smiles by baring their teeth, but it doesn't reach their eyes. I am not stupid. I am also not wrong. There are bylaws for a reason. There are setback requirements for a reason. Trash bins are not meant to sit at the curb for 48 hours like public sculpture. A lawn does not become naturalized because a homeowner is too lazy to mow it. And if a neighborhood agrees to maintain certain standards, then the agreement does not expire simply because enforcing it makes everyone uncomfortable. That was, broadly speaking, my position. Cedar Hollow sits in northern New Jersey, though the brochures call it woodland adjacent, which is the kind of phrase developers use when they want credit for trees they did not plant. The neighborhood is built around 3 cul-de-sacs, 1 ornamental pond, a clubhouse nobody uses except for board meetings and children's birthday parties, and a crescent of protected woods that cannot be touched because of wetlands, nesting birds, or some other legal inconvenience. The woods were there before us. People like to say that as though it meant something wholesome. The deer certainly seemed to think so. They came out every evening in soft groups of 3 or 4, stepping through the maples at the edge of the preserve, crossing lawns with the bland entitlement of relatives who have overstayed Thanksgiving. They ate hostas, tulips, daylilies, young evergreen shrubs, and in one especially offensive instance, the entire lower half of my hydrangea hedge. I had photographs, I had dates, I had a folder. This is the part where people laugh. Donna Carver and her folders. Donna Carver and her little crusades. Donna Carver, who once asked the Henderson twins to remove a basketball hoop from the sidewalk because it blocked pedestrian access, which, by the way, it did. Donna Carver, who reminded Mrs. Lynn that holiday inflatables must be deflated by January 7th, not whenever the weather warms up. Donna Carver, who submitted a complaint about the Becker's dog barking through quiet hours, only to be told by half the neighborhood that Scout was just lonely. I was lonely too, but no one considered that a neighborhood issue. By the time the deer became a real problem, nobody wanted to hear from me. The Cedar Hollow Facebook group treated them like mascots. People posted photos of fawns curled beneath swing sets, bucks standing beside basketball hoops, does wandering through sprinklers with their ears shining wet in the sun. Someone made a joke about issuing them parking permits. Someone else wrote, "Has Donna measured their antlers yet?" That received 43 reactions. Richard Baines, our HOA president, commented with a laughing emoji. Richard is the sort of man who believes conflict can be managed by lowering his voice and folding his hands. He wore quarter zips in every season and liked to say, "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be," which generally meant, "Donna, please stop talking." I sent him my email anyway. The subject line was continued deer intrusion and sanitation concerns. I attached 6 photos, each labeled by date and location. I included a note about Lyme disease. I included a link to the municipal deer management page. I suggested politely that we revisit fencing guidelines at the next board meeting. Richard replied 2 days later, "Donna, thank you for your continued vigilance. As deer are wild animals, this falls outside HOA enforcement. We encourage residents to use commercially available deer deterrents where appropriate." Best, Richard? Continued vigilance. That was his little joke. He was too polite to say neighborhood surveillance system, but I knew. The next day, someone taped a fake violation notice to the community bulletin board by the mailboxes. It said, "Resident, deer, violation, loitering, unauthorized grazing, and failure to comply with Donna Carver. Fine, 1 bag of mulch." People found it very funny. I took it down. That night, the motion lights behind my kitchen came on at 2:13. At first, there was nothing unusual about that. Deer triggered them constantly. They wandered through my backyard as if my lawn were part of a public trail system. I had installed the lights after my husband, Alan, died, partly for safety and partly because a house is different when you are the only person inside it. A noise outside at night has a way of walking directly into your bones. I went to the sliding door and saw 3 deer standing at the far edge of the yard near the tree line. They were not eating, which I found quite odd. After the hydrangea massacre, they stood in a row, facing the house. Their bodies were angled differently, but their heads pointed the same way, toward me, toward the glass. I tapped sharply on the door. Usually deer scatter at a sound like that. Not far, but enough to be satisfying. A startled hop, a flash of white tail, some acknowledgement that the world still had rules. These did not move. One of them blinked. I think I turned on the outside speaker and said, "Go on." My voice sounded ridiculous coming from the wall, thin and official, like an announcement in an empty train station. The deer stayed. After a minute, I closed the curtains. I did not sleep well. The following week, the neighborhood jokes continued. Dana Pike posted a photograph of a buck standing beside the stop sign on Briar Court with the caption, "New crossing guard reporting for duty." Dana posted everything: lost cats, school fundraisers, thunderstorm warnings, suspicious vans, discount patio furniture. She had turned Facebook into a personal weather system. Under the Buck photo, Ethan Delgado commented, "Donna will cite him for improper lane usage." Ethan lived 2 houses down from me with his daughter, Sophie. He was in his early 30s, divorced or separated, something unfinished. His lawn was never terrible, but never quite right either. He had a habit of bringing the trash cans in just late enough to irritate me and just early enough that I could not justify writing him up. He was kind to me in ways that made me dislike him more. He would carry heavy packages from my porch without being asked. He once shoveled the end of my driveway after the plow blocked it. He always said, "Morning, Mrs. Carver," as if I were someone's harmless aunt instead of a woman with eyes. That afternoon I saw him at the mailboxes. "Very funny," I said. He looked confused, then remembered. "Oh, the deer thing?" "Yes, Ethan, the deer thing." He smiled carefully. "Come on, you have to admit it's a little funny." "I do not." They're deer. They are overpopulated, destructive, disease-carrying animals. They're also pretty cute. I looked at him until his smile weakened. Sophie was with him, wearing purple rain boots, though there had been no rain. She was 8 or 9, narrow-shouldered and solemn, in the way some children are when they spend too much time around adults. She held a juice box in both hands and watched the tree line across the street. "The deer were in our yard last night," she said. "I'm sure they were," I said. "One was looking in my window." Ethan sighed. "Soph, it was. That was probably a dream." She shook her head without looking at him. "It didn't like the curtains." Ethan gave me an apologetic look, as if his daughter had inconvenienced me by being strange. I should have asked what she meant. Instead, I said, "Then perhaps your father should close the blinds properly." That was the kind of thing I said then. The kind of thing that made people stop telling me the truth. 2 nights later, the dogs went quiet. You would not think that silence has a texture, but it does. Neighborhood silence is never true silence. It has layers. Furnace hums, distant tires on wet pavement, the little electric buzz of porch lights, the dry scrape of leaves moving along curbs, and dogs. Always dogs. Scout Becker barked at raccoons, delivery trucks, bicycles, thunder, wind, and once an inflatable Santa across the street. The Morrison Terrier yapped whenever someone breathed too close to its fence. Somewhere beyond the pond, a larger dog bayed most nights around 11, mournful and theatrical. But that week, after midnight, they all stopped. The first time I noticed, I was standing in my kitchen drinking tea I did not want. My dishwasher was running. The clock above the stove read 12:36. Outside, 4 deer stood on the community lawn beside the pond, their pale throats visible in the moonlight. Scout began barking, 3 sharp barks, then nothing. The deer did not run. All 4 turned their heads toward the Becker's house. Not quickly, not as animals do when startled, together. After that, Scout did not bark again for 6 nights. I wrote it down. I had always kept lists, but after Alan died, lists became less a tool than a railing, things to hold on to when the rooms became too quiet. Grocery lists, maintenance lists, HOA violations, books to read, phone calls to make, deer sightings. The deer list began casually. May 3rd, 3 deer, backyard, 1:48 a.m., no grazing. May 5th, 4 deer by pond, dogs stopped. May 6th, motion light triggered 2:11, nothing visible. May 7th, 5 deer at tree line behind Pike House, all facing west. May 8th, maybe same deer? Hard to tell, no sound. Then I added columns. Time, location, number, direction faced, behavior, notes. By the second week, the pattern was clear enough that I printed a map of Cedar Hollow and began marking sightings with colored dots. The deer were not wandering randomly. They gathered first along the outer road by the preserve, then at the pond, then near the mailboxes, then closer to the inner cul-de-sac where I lived. This is the point where people usually decide what kind of story they are hearing. If I say I made a map, you think obsession. If I say the dots formed a narrowing circle, you think I am arranging facts to suit an illness. I understand that. I have thought the same thing about myself. But there were photos, there were videos, not only mine. Dana posted a ring clip from her front porch at 3:04 in the morning. It showed 3 deer standing at the base of her driveway, facing the house. The clip was 15 seconds long. They did not move once. Her caption said, "Our new HOA board members are doing inspections." People laughed. I watched the clip 9 times. On the 10th, I noticed the 4th deer. It stood behind the others, partly hidden by a maple trunk at the edge of the frame. Only its front half was visible. Shoulder, neck, head, too high. I paused the video and leaned close to my laptop screen. The shape was wrong in a way I could not name at first. The legs seemed too long, the chest too narrow, the head held at an angle that suggested not alertness but concentration, like a person leaning into a photograph to avoid being cropped out. I commented, "There is another animal in the background. Has anyone contacted animal control?" Dana replied with a laughing face. Ethan wrote, "Donna, please do not start a deer investigation." Then someone else posted, "Too late. She's making them attend mediation." I deleted my comment. That night at 2:13, my front motion lights came on. I was already awake. This is another thing people misunderstand about insomnia. You do not always wake from sleep. Sometimes you are lying there in the dark already, performing sleep for the benefit of no one, eyes closed, hands still, mind walking the same old rooms. The lights flashed through the curtains. I went downstairs instead of looking from the bedroom. I do not know why. Some part of me wanted to be closer to the evidence. Some part wanted the comfort of locks. From the front hall, I could see through the narrow windows on either side of the door. A doe stood on my walkway, not on the lawn, not beside the shrubs, on the walkway, centered between the path lights, facing the door. Her nose nearly touched the wreath. I had a spring wreath then, white silk dogwood and green ribbon. I remember feeling embarrassed by it, as if the deer had caught me pretending its softness. I opened the inner door but left the storm door locked. "Go away," I said. The doe did not lift her head because her head was already lifted. Her ears turned slightly, not toward sound, toward me. There was no fog on the glass, no snorting, no stamp of a hoof. Her eyes reflected the porch light in a flat green shine. "Go," I said again, louder. She looked past me. That was when I stepped back, not because she frightened me, not exactly, because her gaze moved into the house with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the floor plan. Behind me were the stairs, the console table, the framed photograph of Alan on Cape May Beach in 1998. He was holding his sandals in one hand and squinting into the sun. I had not moved that photograph in 7 years. The doe stared at it, then at the stairs, then back at me. The porch light clicked off. The motion sensor had timed out. In the dark, I heard one soft sound against the storm door. Not a knock or a scratch, a tap. One hoof touching glass. The next morning, I sent an email to Richard. The subject line read, "Urgent safety concern regarding deer behavior." I kept it brief. That was deliberate. People say they want detail, but detail makes them nervous. It gives them too much room to dismiss you. "Richard," I wrote, "the deer activity has escalated. Animals are approaching homes after midnight and standing directly at doors/windows. This is not typical grazing behavior. I believe the board should issue guidance advising residents not to approach them and to report unusual activity. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Donna." He replied in 11 minutes. Donna, we understand your concern, but the HOA cannot issue wildlife advisories without guidance from the township. I suggest contacting animal control directly if you feel unsafe. Best, Richard? Feel unsafe. As if safety were a mood. I called animal control. A young woman answered. Her voice had the bored patience of someone who had already been yelled at twice that morning. Are any of the deer injured? No. Acting aggressively? No. Foaming at the mouth? No. Stumbling or unable to walk? I paused. No, I said. Then, unfortunately, there's not much we can do. Deer are very active this time of year. They're standing at my door. They do get bold in residential areas. They are staring into houses. Another pause. I could hear typing. Ma'am, I understand that's unsettling. That word again. Unsettling. A little word people use when they do not want to say frightening. She told me to secure trash, remove food sources, and avoid feeding them. I have never fed them, I said. I'm not saying you have. But she was. Everyone always was. By then, I had begun waking before the lights came on. At 2:10 or 2:11, my eyes opened. No sound, no flash. Just a pressure under consciousness, as if some deep animal part of me had learned the schedule. I would lie still and stare at the ceiling. Then the lights. Right at 2:13. The deer did not appear every night, but the lights did. Front yard, side yard, backyard. Sometimes all three in sequence circling the house. I reviewed the footage each morning. Most clips showed nothing. One showed the edge of a flank passing too close to the camera. One showed 5 deer on the lawn across the street, all facing the same upstairs window. One showed my empty driveway for 13 seconds, then all the shrubs along the walkway trembling at once, though there was no wind. I began saving the clips. In dated folders, I stopped posting. That surprised people. I think they expected me to escalate publicly, to become entertaining. Instead, I became quiet. And because people had never liked me, they mistook quiet for improvement. At the June board meeting, Richard announced that deer concerns had been noted and that the township advised residents to avoid direct contact with wildlife. Dana whispered something to the woman beside her and laughed. I sat in the second row with my binder on my lap and watched Richard's hands as he spoke. He had a small bandage around his thumb. Did something happen to your hand? I asked. He looked annoyed. It's nothing. An animal bite? No, Donna. The room shifted. People loved when Richard corrected me. It made them feel orderly. What happened? I asked. He exhaled through his nose. I scraped it on the shed door. Can we move on? Sophie Delgado was sitting in the back beside Ethan, coloring on a piece of scrap paper because he had not found childcare. She looked up at Richard, then at me. They don't bite, she said. The room went quiet in that indulgent way adults perform around children. Ethan touched her shoulder. Soph. She kept coloring. They just look until you know where to go. I turned in my chair. What did you say? Ethan's face tightened. She's been having nightmares. Sophie pressed harder with the crayon. No, I haven't. Richard cleared his throat. Thank you, Sophie. Moving on. I looked around the room at my neighbors. Their summer sandals, their iced coffees sweating onto folding tables, their polite irritation. They were all so eager to remain inside ordinary life. You could see it in them, their refusal, their almost religious devotion to errands and lawn care and mortgage rates and camp schedules. I had been like that once. I missed it more than I can explain. After the meeting, Ethan caught me near the clubhouse door. Please don't question my daughter like that again, he said. I didn't question her. I asked what she meant. She's a kid. She noticed something. She says weird stuff sometimes. She said they don't bite. He looked tired, younger than usual. "They're deer, Donna." I wanted to tell him about the doe at my door, about the videos, about the way the dots on my map tightened night by night like a fist. Instead, I said, "Your trash cans were out until noon yesterday." His expression changed from concern to exhaustion. "Good night, Mrs. Carver." That was my gift, you see. I could make myself impossible to help. The next clip that mattered came from Dana. She posted it at 7:12 on a Thursday morning with the caption, "Okay, this is actually creepy LOL." It showed her backyard through the washed-out gray of a Ring camera. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. 7 deer stood along her fence line. The Pike Yard backs up to the preserve, so at first nothing seemed unusual. Deer often came through there. The strange part was their arrangement. They were spaced evenly, each one facing the house, each one just far enough from the next to suggest intention without proving it. At second 12, Dana's kitchen light came on. All 7 deer lowered their heads at the same time, not to graze, more like bowing. The comments were uneasy for once. "Okay, nope. That is weird. Maybe coyotes nearby? Why are they doing that together?" Then Ethan commented, "Donna, I am formally apologizing for the antler joke. It should have pleased me. It did not." I downloaded the video before Dana could delete it. The 4th deer from the left was wrong. I saw it immediately this time. Too tall at the shoulder. Neck too vertical. Front legs placed too close together, as if whatever stood there understood the outline of a deer, but not the distribution of weight. The head did not lower with the others. It stayed facing the camera. I froze the image. The eyeshine appeared higher than the fence. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter of the Pike Yard while Dana was out. I know how that sounds. I do. But there is a difference between trespassing and verifying an immediate safety concern. The ground near the fence was soft from rain. There were hoof prints everywhere, small crescent marks, deep impressions, scattered and overlapping, except where the 4th deer had stood. There, in the mud, were 2 long depressions side by side, not footprints exactly, not human, but also not deer. Pressure marks, as if something heavy had stood upright and kept still for a very long time. I took photographs with a ruler for scale. I wondered if I should post the photos, or would everyone just mock me? When I stood, I saw Sophie watching me from the Delgado's yard. She held a red popsicle. It had melted down one wrist. "You're not supposed to go back there," she said. "I am documenting something." "My dad says you document too much." "Your father says many things." She looked toward the trees. "They like you." I followed her gaze. "Who? The deer? They do not like me." "Yes, they do." She turned the popsicle in her hand. "You look back." Something in the woods clicked. Not a branch breaking, a tongue against teeth. Sophie's face emptied of expression. Then she went inside without another word. I did not sleep at all that night. By then, I had stopped turning on lamps. I would stand in the dark kitchen with my tea cooling on the counter and watch the yard through the sliding glass door. At first, I told myself darkness made the outside easier to see. Interior lights create glare. Anyone knows that. But there was another reason. When the house was dark, I felt less observed, and that is a strange thing to admit when the whole trouble began, because I could not stop observing everyone else. I had spent years watching Cedar Hollow from behind curtains, from the front walk, from the driver's seat of my car. I knew who left early, who drank too much, who argued in the garage with the door half open, who let their teenagers sneak out through basement windows. I told myself I monitored standards. I told myself the neighborhood needed someone willing to notice what others ignored. But there is a hunger in watching. I understand that now. A person can become thin from it, not in the body, somewhere else. At 2:13, the backyard light came on. 5 deer stood beyond the patio. The usual doe was in front. I call her the usual doe because she returned so often I began to recognize the torn notch in her left ear, or believed I did. Deer are difficult to tell apart until they are not. She stood closest to the glass. Behind her, the others formed a shallow arc. Their breath did not show, though the night was cool. I placed my hand against the inside of the door. The doe stepped forward. I did not move. She lifted one front leg and placed her hoof against the outside of the glass, directly opposite my palm. For several seconds, we remained that way. Hand, glass, hoof. Something passed through me then, though not in the way stories like this usually describe. No voice in my mind, no vision, no command, only a sense of arrangement. The house behind me, the yard before me, the sleeping neighbors in their separate rooms, the curving streets, the pond, the mailboxes, the woods, all of it suddenly felt less like a place and more like a pattern. And the pattern was incomplete because I was standing apart from it. I pulled my hand away. The doe lowered her leg. The motion light clicked off. In the dark, I saw myself reflected in the glass. For a moment, my face appeared narrow and pale between the curtains, with the deer behind it where my eyes should have been. I did not write that down. There are things even I knew better than to document. The next morning, Ethan came over. He knocked at 9:30, which irritated me because I had just cleaned the glass on the front door, and his fingerprints would be visible in the sun. When I opened it, he held his phone in one hand and looked embarrassed. "Do you have a minute?" "I have several, depending on the subject." He almost smiled. "It's about Sophie." I let him in. That was rare. I did not like people in my house. They looked at things. They made judgments. They stood in the wrong places and left warmth behind. Ethan stepped onto the foyer rug and glanced around. People always did that in my house, as if neatness were a personality disorder. "She's been talking about the deer a lot," he said. "Children notice things." "Yeah. Well, she drew this." He showed me the phone. It was a photograph of a child's drawing on lined notebook paper. Houses along a street. Trees at the end. Deer everywhere. Simple brown bodies with stick legs and black eyes. At the edge of the paper, behind the trees, was something taller. A vertical shape with antlers drawn too high and arms too long. Across the top, Sophie had written, "The one that teaches them." I looked at it for a long time. "Where is the original?" I asked. "Donna, I need to see the original." "No, I need you to tell me whether you've said anything to her." "I have not." "Because this started after the HOA meeting." "This started before the HOA meeting." He rubbed his face. "Listen to yourself." "I am." "She's a little girl." "I know that." "She's scared." "So am I." The words came out before I could stop them. Ethan's expression changed. It was not belief exactly. Belief would come later, and not cleanly. This was the moment when irritation lost its footing. I took him to the dining room. My map was spread across the table. I had not intended to show anyone. There were too many markings, too many notes, too much of myself exposed in the precise columns and color-coded routes. But Ethan stood there quietly as I explained. The sightings, the times, the direction of their bodies, the way each cluster moved closer to the inner cul-de-sac, the 213 pattern, the videos, the 4th deer, the photos of the prints in the Pike's yard. He did not laugh. That frightened me more than laughter would have. After a while, he pointed to the map. "They're around your house." "Yes. No, I mean," he leaned closer, "not just near it, around it." The colored dots formed a ring, not perfect, almost. The imperfection made it worse. It looked organic, patient, like roots finding a foundation crack. Ethan swallowed. "Have you called anyone?" "Yes." And they told me not to feed them. He looked toward my windows, a ridiculous instinct. It was broad daylight. Still, I looked too. For the first time in years, someone else stood in my house and saw the same invisible shape I did. I nearly cried. Instead, I said, "Your lawn is improving." He laughed once sharply because there was nowhere else for fear to go. That night, Ethan stayed awake. He told me later he meant only to watch from his daughter's room. Sophie's window faced the street, and he had moved her to his bed for the night. He sat in a chair by the curtains with his phone ready, feeling, I imagine, foolish. At 2:13, my garage lights came on, then the Beckers, then the Pikes, then Ethan's. He said the street lit itself in pieces, house by house, as if someone were walking the cul-de-sac with a hand over each sensor. The deer were already there, 12 of them, standing in the road, not facing my house this time, facing his. He did not send me the video until morning. I watched it alone in my kitchen. The deer stood with their heads lifted toward Sophie's window. At second 21, one deer near the mailbox turned toward Ethan's camera. It was the torn-ear doe, my doe. I do not know why I thought of her that way, but I did. At second 26, another figure moved behind the deer at the edge of the woods, only briefly, only a pale vertical suggestion between trunks. It bent forward on long legs, lowering itself until its head aligned with theirs. Pretending. That was the word that came to me. Not hiding, pretending, and badly at that. Ethan's hands shook badly enough that the image blurred. In the audio under his breathing, Sophie's voice said from somewhere behind him, small and sleepy, "Don't let them count us." He stopped recording. By then, the neighborhood had begun to change, though not in any way you could prove to someone determined not to see it. People brought their children in earlier. Porch lights stayed on later. The Facebook jokes became shorter, then stopped. Dana posted less. Richard sent a community note reminding everyone that deer are part of the local ecosystem and should not be approached. He did not mention the videos. He did not mention that his own backyard camera had captured 9 deer standing outside his shed for 2 hours while he and his wife slept. I knew because his wife sent it to me privately. "Please don't share this," she wrote. "Richard is already stressed." In the video, Richard's bandaged hand appeared briefly at the kitchen window. All 9 deer turned toward him. One lifted its front leg, not high, just enough, like acknowledgement. Richard resigned from the HOA the next day, citing personal reasons. No one replaced him. For a while, that pleased me. I had wanted power in the neighborhood, or thought I did. I had wanted people to admit that standards mattered, that attention mattered, that my vigilance had value. But there is a terrible loneliness in being vindicated too late. Neighbors began calling me. Not many. Not openly. A text from Dana. "Are you seeing them tonight?" A voicemail from Mrs. Becker. "Scout won't go outside." An email from the Patels. "Have you noticed activity near the pond?" Nobody apologized. They simply shifted the burden of knowing on to me as if I had asked for it. I answered it first. I shared practical advice. Keep lights on. Do not approach. Document times. Close lower blinds, but leave upper windows visible. I do not know why I suggested that last part. It felt right. Then the calls began to irritate me, not because I did not care, because their fear was messy. They wanted explanations, reassurance, instructions. They wanted to be frightened and comforted in the same breath. They wanted me to organize the impossible into bullet points and distribute it before dinner. I had spent years trying to make them listen. Now I wanted them quiet. And that was when I began to understand that something in me had shifted. It was not a single monumental shift. No voice, no wound, no night I could point to and say, that was when Donna Carver stopped being herself. Instead, Habits loosened. I stopped checking the mail. I let the recycling bin sit beside the garage for 2 days. I forgot to submit the June landscaping report. One afternoon, I stood barefoot in my backyard for almost an hour, looking at the tree line, barefoot, on grass. I had not done that since Alan was alive. The ground felt busy beneath me. That is the only word I have. Busy, insects moving, roots drinking, moisture lowering itself through soil. Far off beyond the visible woods, something large stepping carefully between trunks, not a sound, a placement. When Ethan found me there, he called my name 3 times before I turned. "You okay?" he asked from the patio. I looked at his face and could not immediately remember why faces mattered so much. Then I did, and the remembering hurt. "I'm fine," I said. "You're outside without shoes." "I live here." He glanced toward the trees. "You didn't answer my texts." I was occupied. "With what?" I looked back at the woods. The leaves moved, though there was no wind. "Listening." Ethan came no closer. That evening he called my son. I had not spoken to Mark in nearly 3 months. He lives in Colorado with his wife and 2 children, who know me mostly as a name attached to holiday cards. He called at 8:15, which meant Ethan had frightened him. "Mom," he said, "what's going on?" "Nothing is going on. Your neighbor said you've been acting strange." "Which neighbor?" "Ethan." Ethan lets crabgrass spread along his side yard. A pause. "Mom." There is a tone adult children use when they believe they are being patient. It is unbearable because it contains every age they have ever been. 5, wanting juice. 14, rolling eyes. 38, deciding you are now the problem. "I am handling something," I said. What does that mean?" "It means there are circumstances here that require attention." "What circumstances?" Outside, the motion light over the side yard turned on. It was only 8:17. Too early. My hand tightened around the phone. "Mom, I have to go." "No, don't hang up. Ethan said something about deer." At the side window beyond the laundry room, a deer stood beside the air conditioning unit. The torn-ear doe. She should not have been visible from that angle. The side yard was narrow, bordered by fence and holly. She had placed herself exactly where the light would catch one eye. "Mom, are you there?" The doe blinked. I felt the blink behind my own eyes. "I'm here," I said, but I was not sure which of us had answered. After that time became less reliable, I still know the sequence of events. I can list them. I can arrange them as I have always arranged things in order and category. But the experience of those days was different, wider, less personal. The neighborhood breathed at night. That sounds poetic, and I dislike it for that reason, but I mean it literally. Cedar Hollow had a rhythm after dark, garage lights clicking on, curtains shifting, deer hooves on asphalt, human bodies turning in beds, dogs holding their barking in their throats. At 2:13, everything aligned. The deer gathered. I stood at my window. Somewhere in the woods, the tall thing lowered itself among them. I no longer thought of it as a monster. That word belongs to stories people tell so they can remain outside them. This was not outside. It was in the drainage ditch, and beneath the swing set, and beside the ornamental pond, with its broken fountain. It was in the HOA bylaws no one read, and the little white flags marking pesticide treatment and the polite smiles at the mailboxes. It was in every place where we had drawn lines and pretended nature had agreed to them. It had been watching us draw those lines, learning what they meant, learning which ones mattered, learning that a door was different from a window, that a bedroom mattered more than a garage, that people looked away when embarrassed, that people ignored women they had already decided were difficult. I had made myself easy to ignore. I had also made myself easy to find. The night I left, Ethan saw me. He has never told people the full story. I do not blame him. Some truths become smaller when spoken in daylight, but I remember. My house was dark. I had turned off every lamp, unplugged the kitchen clock, silenced the refrigerator alarm because the door kept opening though I had closed it, or thought I had. At 2:13, every motion light on Carriage Lane came on at once. The cul-de-sac filled with white light. I stood in the foyer wearing my blue robe and Alan's old gardening shoes. I had not worn them since the summer he died. They were too large, cracked at the heel, still holding the shape of his feet, better than the world held any other part of him. The front door was open. The storm door was not. Beyond it, the deer stood in the street. So many, more than Cedar Hollow had ever held, more than should have fit in that clean suburban circle. They lined the road, the lawns, the strip of grass around the stop sign. They stood between parked cars and beside mailboxes and beneath porch lights, all facing me. The torn-ear doe stood at the walkway. Behind her, the others waited, not impatiently. They had no need for impatience. Ethan came out of his house. I saw him across the street in sweatpants and a coat thrown over a t-shirt, phone in hand, face pale in the artificial light. He did not call out at first. I think some part of him understood sound would be rude. Then Sophie appeared behind him in the doorway. That broke him. "Donna!" he called. The deer did not turn. I did. For a moment, seeing him there hurt terribly. Not because we were close. We were not. But because he had tried, in the clumsy, limited way people try when they realize too late that someone has been alone for a long time. "Go inside," I said. He stepped off his porch. "Come over here." "I can't." "Yes, you can." The torn-ear doe lifted her head. Ethan stopped. The tall thing stood at the edge of the woods. It was not under the trees now. Not entirely. It had come forward to the place where the asphalt ended and the preserve began. The streetlight did not touch it properly. Light seemed to find parts of it and forget the rest. I will not describe it more than that. Description is a kind of invitation. It lowered itself. The deer lowered their heads. For a moment, the whole neighborhood bowed, not to me, with me. That is the difference I need you to understand, though I know I should not phrase it that way. Need is a human word. Understanding is not what this wants. What happened next was quiet. I opened the storm door. The air smelled of damp leaves, cut grass, and the faint mineral odor of the pond. No deer moved as I stepped onto the porch. No hoof struck pavement. No head jerked. No animal panic. They made space before I reached them, parting down the center of the walkway with such careful coordination that it felt practiced. Ethan said my name again. I looked back once. His face was full of all the things people with full houses do not say until the house is empty. I wanted to tell him to keep Sophie away from the windows. I wanted to tell him to mow on a higher blade setting in July because cutting too short weakens the roots. I wanted to tell him I was sorry I had made every kindness difficult. Instead, I lifted one hand. Not a wave, not exactly. The torn-ear doe stepped beside me. Together we walked toward the dark place at the end of the cul-de-sac. I did not feel taken. I imagine that is hard to believe. The fear was there, yes, a small human thing, frantic and bright, calling from somewhere behind me. But beyond it was something larger and calmer, a patient arrangement of attention, spreading through bodies, through eyes, through the soft black shine of noses, lifted in the night. I understood then why they stood so still. Movement is wasteful when watching is enough. For 3 days, people searched the woods. Police came, dogs came, volunteers in bright vests moved through the preserve, calling my name as if names remain useful after a certain point. Mark flew in from Colorado and stood in my kitchen, looking at the labeled pantry shelves as though they might accuse him. Richard Baines returned long enough to say this was a tragedy, and then left, before anyone could ask what kind. They found my robe folded on a stone by the drainage creek. They found Alan's shoes side by side beneath a cedar tree. They found no blood, no signs of struggle, no body. After that, Cedar Hollow changed in the ordinary ways places change after refusing the truth. People installed more cameras. The HOA hired a wildlife consultant. The township held a meeting. Dana deleted old posts. Ethan stopped commenting online altogether. By autumn, the deer were still there. Fewer, people said. Calmer, less destructive. They no longer ate the hydrangeas. Sometimes Ethan sees one at the edge of his lawn after midnight, a doe with a torn left ear. She stands beneath the streetlight and looks toward Sophie's window until he closes the curtains. He tells himself it is only an animal. He tells himself a lot of things. Last week, on the first cold night of the season, he found a violation notice tucked beneath his windshield wiper. The paper was damp. No envelope. No signature. Just one sentence written in block letters so neat they almost looked typed. Grass height exceeds community standard. He looked toward my house then. It has been empty for months, but the porch light was on. Across the cul-de-sac at the edge of the woods, a single deer stood watching him. It did not run when he stepped closer. It did not lower its head. After a while, it lifted one front leg. Only slightly. A small, stiff, familiar gesture. Then it turned and walked back into the trees where several other shapes waited in the dark, still and patient and listening. If you hear something standing too quietly outside your house after midnight, close your blinds, ignore the HOA guidelines, and subscribe to the Leatherbound Grimoire before it notices you noticing it.